started my sophomore year of college. I was assigned a roommate named Hannah. We weren't friends right away. Honestly, we barely spoke. She was the kind of person who'd quietly say good morning, head to class, and disappear in the room for the rest of the day. She wasn't rude, just private, which didn't really bother me because I was pretty independent too. We settled into a routine. I'd wake up early for class, while she'd usually leave an hour later. Sometimes we'd eat dinner together if we'd happen to be home at the same time, but most conversations only lasted a few minutes. Still, over time, I started noticing little things about her, things that didn't seem strange individually, but together, they painted a very odd picture. For one, she never talked about her family. Not once. Whenever someone asked her where she was from, she'd answer with the name of a small town and immediately change the subject. She never showed anyone pictures from her home, never mentioned siblings, never told childhood stories, nothing. At first, I figured maybe she just wasn't close with them. Plenty people weren't. The second thing I noticed was that she refused to have her picture taken. One afternoon, a group of girls on our floor wanted to take a photo together after a football game. Everyone crowded into the hallway, except Hannah. She politely smiled and stepped out of frame. Someone joked, "Come on, it's just one picture." She shook her head. "I really don't like having my picture taken." Nobody pushed it, but it happened again and again. At birthday parties, club events, study groups. Every single time a camera came out, she disappeared. Then there was the suitcase. It sat in the corner of her room all year, always packed, always zipped shut. I only noticed because one afternoon I was helping her move a small bookshelf. The closet door swung open, and there it was, a full-size suitcase with a luggage tag already attached. I laughed and said, "What, are you planning to run away?" The smile on her face vanished almost instantly. For a second, she looked genuinely scared. Then she forced another smile. You never know. That answer stayed with me longer than it probably should have. As the school year went on, we actually became pretty comfortable with each other. She wasn't nearly as quiet once you got to know her. She had a dry sense of humor, loved old mystery novels, and somehow managed to beat me at every card game we played. By spring semester, I started thinking of her as a friend. Then finals ended. I accepted a summer internship about an hour away from campus. Instead of going back home, I found a small apartment close to where I'd be working. One evening, Hannah overheard me talking about it while I was packing. She stood quietly in the doorway for a moment before asking, would it be okay if I stayed there too? I was surprised. She explained that she didn't want to go home over the summer. She offered to split rent, utilities, groceries, everything. I asked why she didn't want to stay with her parents. She hesitated, then simply said, "It's complicated." Something about the way she said it made me stop questioning. It wasn't annoyance. It wasn't embarrassment. It sounded like fear. So I agreed. A few weeks later, we moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment. The first month couldn't have gone better. We settled into a routine. I'd work during the day. She'd work during the evenings at a bookstore downtown. On weekends, we'd watch movies, order takeout, and complain about work. It honestly felt like living with a sibling. Then one night, I woke up around 2 in the morning because I heard someone talking. At first, I thought she was just watching TV, but as I listened, I realized that she was on the phone. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "No, stopped calling. A long pause. Then I said no. The conversation ended. The next morning, I asked if everything was okay. She smiled and she said, "I'm fine." And that was it. A few days later, it happened again. This time, her voice sounded angrier. "You don't get to decide that." Another pause. "I don't belong there anymore." Then silence. Then I heard her crying. By the time I walked into the hallway, she had already gone back into her room. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. I wanted to ask about it, but something told me that she wasn't ready to talk. About a week later, I came home from work and found her sitting on the living room floor. She wasn't watching TV, wasn't reading, just sitting there. Her knees pulled into her chest. She looked like she had been crying for hours. I asked if she wanted to talk. She slowly shook her head. Instead, she asked me something I still think about. If someone asked where I lived, you wouldn't tell them, would you? I laughed a little. Of course not. She nodded. Promise. The seriousness in her voice caught me off guard. I promise. She thanked me, then went back to her room. I remember thinking that she was probably dealing with some overbearing parents. Maybe they were controlling. Maybe they just didn't approve of her being away from home. Whatever it was, it didn't seem like my place to pry. I wish I had, though, because 3 days later, my phone rang. The phone number wasn't saved in my contacts. When I answered, an older man's voice immediately answered. "Is Hannah there?" I assumed it was her father. "I can take a message." "No, I need to know where she is." His tone wasn't worried, it was demanding. I asked who he was. Instead of answering, he repeated the question. "Where is she?" Something about the way he spoke made every hair on my arm stand up. I simply replied, "I'm not comfortable giving out that information." Then the line went silent. For several seconds, neither of us said anything. Then he quietly said, "You don't understand what you're interfering with." And then the call disconnected. I stood there staring at my phone. A minute later, it rang again. The same number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another number called, and another. By the 5th call, I finally turned my phone off. When Hannah got home from work that evening, I told her everything. The second I mentioned the phone calls, the color drained from her face. She didn't even ask what the man had said. Instead, she asked, "Did you tell him where I was?" I shook my head. "No." She let out a long breath and sat down at the kitchen table. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked her who he was. She stared at the table for what felt like an entire minute. Then she quietly said, "My father." I asked why he was trying so hard to find her. She looked up at me. "I can't tell you." "Why not?" "Because the less you know, the safer you'll be." That answer didn't make me feel any better. Over the next week, the calls got worse. Different phone numbers, different voices, sometimes men, sometimes women. One woman claimed that she was Hannah's aunt. Another insisted that she was a police officer trying to conduct a wellness check. One man said that he was a pastor from her hometown. Every single one of them wanted exactly one thing: our address. Eventually, I stopped answering unknown numbers altogether. It didn't matter. They started leaving voicemails instead. Some were polite. Others sounded angry. One simply said, "She belongs with her family." Nothing else. Just like that. One Saturday morning, we drove to the grocery store like we always did. Everything was normal until we reached the cereal aisle. Hannah suddenly froze. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring toward the front of the store. Her shopping baskets slipped from her hands and hit the floor. Boxes scattered everywhere. "Hannah." She grabbed my wrist. "We need to leave." "What happened?" I questioned. "Now," is the only thing she replied with. She wasn't raising her voice. If anything, that made it worse. She sounded terrified. We abandoned the cart and walked as quickly as we could toward the exit. Just before we reached the doors, I glanced over my shoulder. Near the customer service desk stood an older man. He wasn't shopping. He wasn't talking to anyone. He was just watching us, completely still. The entire drive home, Hannah didn't say a word. That night, I asked her if the man was her father. She shook her head, "No." "Then who was he?" She whispered, "Someone from my home." I waited for her to explain, but she never did. A few days later, I came home from work and found every blind in our apartment closed, every light off, even though it was the middle of the day. Hannah was sitting on the living room floor. She had a baseball bat resting across her lap. I laughed nervously. "Okay, what's going on?" She looked toward the window. "I think someone was outside." "Did you call the police?" "No." "Well, girl, why?" "Because by the time they would have got here, he'd already be gone." I looked outside, and I saw nothing. No cars, no people, just an empty parking lot. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I heard tap, tap, tap. It was so quiet that I thought I imagined it. Then it happened again. 3 slow knocks. Not on the front door, on my bedroom window. I sat perfectly still. The tapping stopped. A few seconds later, it came from Hannah's window instead. 3 more taps, then silence. I grabbed my phone and called the campus police. By the time they arrived, no one was there. The officer walked around the building with a flashlight for nearly 20 minutes. Nothing. As they were leaving, one of them stopped beneath Hannah's window. "That's strange." I walked over. There was muddy footprints beneath the window. Not walking toward it, walking away from it. Just a cluster of footprints, as if someone had stood there for a very long time, watching. After that, everything changed. Hannah barely left the apartment. She jumped every time the phone buzzed. She checked the people before answering the door. Sometimes I catch her staring outside the smallest crack of the blinds, like she was expecting someone to be waiting outside. One evening, she finally opened up. Not completely, just enough. She told me that she'd grown up in a religious community where every decision was made for you. Who you talk to, she ever said to me. About a year later, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that happened. So I searched for her hometown online. Buried beneath several news articles was an investigation into a secluded religious group that had operated over there for decades. Former members described strict rules, isolation, control, families pressured to arrange marriages approved by church leaders. Several young women had disappeared after trying to leave. One of the photographs showed a group outside a large white building. Standing near the back was Hannah. The article never said what happened to her, only that she'd vanished shortly before the investigation began. The police believed that she'd run away. Some former members believed that she had been taken back. No one knew for certain. I searched public records, social media, everything I could think of. I never found another trace of her. Sometimes I still wonder if she's out there somewhere, living under a different name, starting over. But every now and then, usually late at night, I'll get a phone call from a number I don't recognize. When I answer, no one speaks. There's only silence. And just before the call disconnects, I always hear the same thing. 3 soft taps. Tap, tap, tap. I've never answered another unknown number again.